everyone, my name is Josh Cruz. I'm a Clemson alumni, graduated in December of 2016. Shortly after that, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia to pursue a career in audio engineering. When I first got there, I started working at Passion City Church, which is a mega church in the center of Atlanta. And from there, I was able to connect with a lot of organizations and artists and tours. I've been on the road with Passion Band. I've mixed monitors for Elevation Worship on the road, and a bunch of various other artists. I'm currently the front of house engineer, production manager for Sean Curran. And I've even gone so far outside of the CCM world to be a part of the first Dude Perfect tour that went out on the road in the summer of 2019. We were supposed to go out on the road this year, 2020, but obviously that was pushed back. So we'll be out on the road again, 2021. Maybe we'll see some of you guys there. I am currently finishing out the year as a full-time contractor at Passion City Church. And so a lot of the information we're going to talk about today is stuff that I've learned working through that. I'm primarily a monitor engineer, and with that involves a lot of mixes, a lot of interaction with band members. And so today I'm going to share a bunch of tips and tricks with you about the DiGiCo SD12 that I work with at the church. And really what I want to go over is the ability to dive into an audio console, figure out what makes it tick, how to speed up your workflow, and find out all the nitty-gritty things that the engineers programmed into there to allow you to do things that not every other console can do. So what we're looking at right now is an offline editor, which allows me to work on show files on the console, and it is divided into two sections. So this is a complete exact copy of what you would see on the screens on the audio console. And it's divided into the left-hand side and an identical section on the right-hand side. But on the right-hand side, you also have this main overview screen, which we're going to be looking at a lot today. I'll slide that over. So the first thing I want to show you is once you go into a new show file, how to go ahead and start setting things up. Now for me, in terms of what makes DiGiCo more flexible, a lot faster for my workflow than any other console are three main topics. It is the macro section, the layout of the console, and the ability to route things very flexibly. So we're going to start with macros. And with that, we're going to go ahead and go into a blank session file. So normally you would see something like new session, but for this one, if you go to the top left-hand corner, you're going to see this tab called session structure. This allows you to go in and choose exactly how you want things to be set up, but we're going to just do a blank session. So I'm going to click default all. You might be tempted to type in the session title, but this is more of like a note section. So we're going to go ahead and restructure. And just as a quick aside, whenever I'm typing in the name of a new session file, I have the need to be able to share these with other engineers and other people. So I want to make sure whenever they pull this up on their computer or in a console or an offline editor, they know exactly what they're pulling up. So just a quick tip on how I name files is I like to start with the console I'm using. So the SD1296, the version of the firmware. With DiGiCo specifically, there are a lot of different firmwares because they have a pretty consistent upgrade plan every couple of months. And if you try to load a certain session on a different firmware, it might not always work. And one last thing is the sample rate. So I go ahead and add that, and then whatever the event is. Go ahead and save that out. So whenever you load a blank session, it can be a little bit overwhelming and time consuming to adjust all of the little nuances of how you want to work. It's just a blank canvas for you to paint your session file on. One feature that DiGiCo has that I haven't seen on any other console is the ability to load partial files. And with that, I'm able to load my macros. So if you aren't familiar with what a macro is, it allows you to perform one or multiple actions at one time with one press of a button. And so getting into how I use the macros, the first thing I'm able to do with it is to set up my session file much quicker than doing everything individually. So what I'm going to do, I actually down here, I have a show file with the exact same console and firmware version. And I can partial load up here to the right-hand side all of my macros. So I'm gonna go ahead and load that. And so you'll notice nothing really changed. All of the channels are the default 1, 2, 3, 4, going all the way to 48. But now, if I go to the top right-hand corner, you'll see setup. On the 5th tab, it says macros. And before this would have been blank, but now I have all of the macros that one, I might use during a show, or two, like I'm gonna do now, is to help set up my session file. So macros can do a wide range of things. You'll see all of these command types over here as you're building a new macro, and that goes into subfolders with even more commands. So just an example of something that I might go ahead and load in without having to build when I'm making a new show file. You'll see right here, there's one that says lights out. So that's a button that I have whenever you're doing an event or a show. If your lighting guy has pre-programmed a blackout during a moment of a song to create, some energy. If I'm standing stage left and my console is shining really bright, he's gonna get a little bit mad at me. So what I have is a button to be able to push that, and then I can go back to the lights being full once the stage is lit again. Now, right below that, we'll see this other macro called monitor setup. Being a monitor engineer for a lot of different acts, there's some things that I like to make sure that I have, because these audio consoles can be used for a variety of different engineering roles. And they have options that you need to make sure that you check so that they fit the role that you're doing. So to just give you an example, right here near the center, there's this options tab up at the top of your main screen. And you'll see all of these different tabs, so many different options. And what I don't want to have to do is go through and select all of those individually. I know what I want, but why would I take the 10 minutes to check the ones that I need when I can just build a macro to do it for me? So whenever I start, I just have this macro set up, and we're going to go and look down here. You'll see where it changes. One thing that I add down here, you'll see it'll just pulls up a couple of other pages that we'll get into later, but you'll see global second function, that turned to yes, all with the press of a button. And you can add as many or as few things as you want, but you can see here exactly what I've added. Now, one really cool feature about macros, especially on DiGiCo, is that you have this capture function. So instead of having to go through and select exactly what you want through all of these menus, you might forget where they are, you have the capture function, and you can just do what you want the macro to do. So pretend you have your first 5 channels over here to the left, and you want to be able to turn on 5 EQs at the beginning of a song to change how your drums sound, for example. Well, if I were to go through and click these on, it'll sound really weird if it needs to happen on the downbeat of a song. So what I can do is I just made a macro for it. I'll just add EQ on. And now you'll see over here to the left, if I hit EQ on, they all turn on at once. So really powerful feature that DiGiCo has to allow you to do so many things that you wouldn't normally be able to do on your own or manually. So going over to a different session, let's transition over to a session I worked on this last Sunday. This is going to be a full monitor session with 9 band members at the time, though it's set up for more. The next section that I want to talk about is layout. Layout is incredibly important when it comes to workflow. If you don't know where your faders are, if you don't know where your mixes are, you're not going to be able to be an effective monitor engineer. Because when you have 9 people telling you exactly what they want at the exact same time, it is a struggle if you're trying to search pages of faders to be able to find their instrument or their mix. To give an example of a way that I use layouts on the fly, I'll move this over here, this is on the right-hand side of my console, I have all of my vocalists. So for this band, there were 4 vocalists and 5 band members. I know on the right-hand side, I have my vocals, and I also have my program mics. Program mics being anything that would be non-musical. So anybody speaking on stage or anybody doing anything that isn't singing. So say all 3 of these program mics right here were being used simultaneously, and for some reason they decided to invite an extra person on stage. Now, if I'm mixing 9 people's mixes and I don't have that other mic there ready, I don't want to have to go down here to this third tab of any of my extra mics available and hop back up, going back and forth as all of the 4 people are talking. So what I can do really, really quickly with this blank canvas of channels, so you see these black strips right here, these are empty channels that don't have anything. So what I can do is quickly swap a fader into that. I just click this LCD function over here, go to the swap function, and go to my blank channels. We normally have a backup handheld for moments just like this, and an easy way to just bring it up to the layer that I need is just to swap it. So in addition to last minute things just like this, or building your session file, what you can see over here on the left-hand side is I have all of my instruments divided up into sections. I have different pages. I have my rhythm section, which has my bass and my drums. I have keys and tracks. And I have these little blanks in here just because they give me physical divides between the faders, so everything's not together and it's easier to reach for, because I know the keys are only 2 channels or 2 faders to the left. Tracks are here in the center with 4 channels, and it's easy to group that together in my mind when I have physical divides between the 2. So moving to the last section, the third and final section is a little bit complicated and a little bit technical, but it's one of the most important things and reasons of why Passion City Church chose to go with the DiGiCo platform and has allowed DiGiCo to be one of the leading manufacturers of consoles for A-level arena stadium tours, TV and broadcast. It gives a lot of power in the term routing. So routing is the ability for you to take an input and send it to any section of the console processing to an output. This isn't a slogan by any means, but the way that I view the routing of DiGiCo consoles is you can route anything, anywhere. And I take full advantage of that as a monitor engineer. So one of the first things that I like to use is something called copy audio. This is up to the right-hand side and has under setup and has the ability to route so many things without touching your console whatsoever. So what this means is I can look at any of the inputs coming into my console, inputs being microphones, tracks, iTunes, anything that would be audio coming into the console, and send it to an output. Outputs being mixes, PA system, recordings. And so specifically, I'm using copy audio for a recording. So on Sunday, I had my laptop set up right beside me. And what I wanted to do is this rack 1.11 right here is all of my inputs for the band, because all I really needed to record was the band so that I could take it and mix it down later. And what it allows me to do with this grid is to select the kick in microphone and everything after that, route it directly to the MGB1A, which is a device used for recording directly to a computer or things like that. So I open that up and I can select every single input going from the channel 1 out into the recording over here. So there's a lot of uses, and the reason that this is so flexible is because it doesn't have to touch any of my faders, any of my mixes at all. It all happens in the background, which is really, really important so that it doesn't get in the way of any of the monitor mixes. Another really flexible part about DiGiCo is they use a protocol called OptiCore. There's a lot of different ways consoles interact. DiGiCo has chosen a fiber protocol. And what that allows you to do is to send so much more information in between consoles. So if you go up to the top right-hand corner under Audio I/O, pulls up a menu right here. And the first thing that OptiCore allows you to do that is really helpful, say you have a pretty simple setup. This setup is a little bit more complex and has a lot of different tabs over here on the ports. But if you have a simple setup such as one rack, the 1.11, and you have a front of house console and a monitor console. A lot of times consoles and stage racks will only give you the ability to have one of them access the outputs, which is this second half of all of these boxes over here to the right. Like we talked about before, outputs being anything that you send to monitor mixes, the PA, etc. With OptiCore, you can actually choose between your front of house, monitor, or whatever else console, which rack of, or it's actually called a card, of 8 outputs that you want to assign to whichever console. So say on this section of 8 outputs, I want my front of house engineer to be able to control it. But currently with this check mark, I'm controlling it. With OptiCore, you can just select, you can deselect that card, and now on his console, he would see this as an X, and it would be available for him to check. Really, really flexible. One of the best features is what's called consend. Con is short for console. And what that allows you to do is to send audio back and forth between consoles without touching a stage rack. Back in the day, and even on some systems now, you would have to do what's called a loop back, which is where you physically take a cable out of one console or stage rack and plug it right back into another channel so that you can access audio between the two consoles. But every time you want to do more than one channel, that's another cable that you have to use and another input that you have to use. With the OptiCore protocol in fiber, you actually have the ability for any console on the fiber to send up to 56 channels, which is a massive amount of channels. But you'll see here, we're only taking up 24 channels from the monitor console, 24 channels from the front of house console. And we also have a broadcast console. Because of the COVID season, we're doing a lot of streaming online weekly, and that is a third console that we have to introduce to the fiber ring. And along with sending audio, you actually have a really fun feature, and it becomes really, really helpful whenever there's so many people talking on radio or comm or any other communication between different people. You have a text chat, and you can select who you want to send it to. Say I want to send something to my front of house engineer. You can send it to him, and it'll pop right up. So one last thing that I want to talk about in terms of routing is the matrix. DiGiCo does this so well, and it's incredibly flexible. So right here in the top center, you have the matrix section. This can be used for a lot of different things, but in terms of being a monitor engineer, what the problem it solves for me is the ability to listen to all of the other people outside of the band that I need to hear whenever I'm in the middle of my workflow. So normally you have what's called a Q bus running to your headphones or your in-ears. And that will go directly out into a pack, a wireless pack, or out of a headphone jack. But for me, the way that I set it up, and part of the monitor setup from the macro that we talked about earlier, is I set up my Q over here on the matrix N1 to the top left of this page. And what that allows me to do is I hear exactly what the Q bus is sending, but I can also introduce more inputs. So what I have here is I have a radio input. I have a monitor talkback so I can hear myself. It's just easier to talk whenever you can hear a little bit of your own voice when you're so isolated. Broadcast, person talking to me, front of house engineer talking to me, and then a couple of other things here at the end. But what's interesting is you also have individual volume control. So what I've done is I've turned up the right side on all of them, except for the one over here, the stage announce, which I've turned up higher on the left so that I can hear it on different sides of my mix. And say for the radio, I wear my radio on my right shoulder. So whenever somebody talks to me on radio, it sounds like it's coming from my radio, even though I know I'm isolated in my in-ears. So when I respond, everything feels seamless. So that's a little bit about routing. One thing I do want to go back to that I discovered really recently that is incredibly fun and incredibly helpful, and the reason that I am showing you all of this on the DiGiCo SD12. So with macros, one thing that you can do is that I found a guy in Denmark who actually coded a software to work on a very small computer called a Raspberry Pi. And there's just a little computer inside of this plastic box. And what he's done is he's coded a software to work with what's called a Stream Deck. So on the Stream Deck, you have 15 LCD screens, and they're just buttons. And what I've done is I've assigned all of my mixes to these buttons. And it's just a little plastic box that I can sit in the center of my console to have quick reach of all of my mixes. And so if we go back to the offline editor, I can show you, as you'll see here on layer 1, I actually have my vocals and the program mics that we talked about. Now, whenever you're mixing, usually your mixes would be on one of these layers within easy reach. But because the SD12 only has the 2 sections, the left and the right, I would rather have more faders to mix from and less faders to be tied up to my mixes. So that's where this Stream Deck comes in. So if I go to my layer 2 where my mixes are, if you select this button on the console, right here, this purple button will go to chaos mix. That chooses who you're mixing. And you'll see all these faders changes because it's showing you exactly what their mix looks like. And what happens is you run out of time to be able to switch back and forth when everybody's yelling at you about what they want between layer 1 and layer 2. So having this Stream Deck, if you'll see, I'll hold it up again. We're currently on CU mix. And then if I hit, say, the electric or the keys 1 mix, it now selects the keys mix all from this. Now it's a little bit buggy on the offline editor, which is why it went away for a second. But on the console, it works incredibly fast. There's no delay, and it feels like you're actually pressing the button, which is awesome. Well, that's just a little bit of what I have been able to discover about the DiGiCo console. And really what this is about is showing you how to dive into your console, figuring out how to speed up your workflow, and learning about exactly how the engineers programmed it to be. I would encourage you to read the manual, talk to people who've used the console a lot more than you, and just find out how to be a better engineer in the role that you're filling. Thank you guys for listening to this Lunchtime Listens. Looking forward to more of these. If you have any more questions, are on the DiGiCo platform and want to know a little bit more, feel free to look me up on Instagram. My business name is Space Bear Audio, just at Space Bear Audio. Feel free to send me a message on there. But thank you guys, and I'll talk to you later.